On an ordinary day, the protagonist was changing outfits for a photo shoot, which had been organized by the modeling company Yue Shui Entertainment. For 6 months now, he had been working for a woman named Li Xiang. Despite the staff's kindness towards him, the young man felt uneasy. This was because he was compelled to work in various female personas. Dao Tian was uncertain about the appropriateness of the outfit chosen for him for the shoot, as he didn't want to deceive people by dressing in women's clothing. His boss tried to convince him otherwise. Other employees in the company were also happy to dress him in cute outfits, as this was the only way the protagonist enjoyed true popularity. That is why everyone, including the manager, diligently argued that by dressing in women's clothing, he was not deceiving anyone. The woman explained to the young man about gender equality and the necessity for models to sometimes break away from conventional beauty standards in photo shoots. Moreover, during the conversation, she accused Dao Tian of not understanding equality in modern fashion. Li Sang admitted that an outsider might judge him for this, but she wouldn't, knowing he came from a small village and was thus uneducated. In the end, the woman managed to convince the naive worker that he had an important mission to the public, and thus shouldn't be ashamed of wearing dresses. Even though it was really clever, the protagonist believed it, as he had originally come to the capital to achieve his goal of earning money to pay off his family's. Half a year ago, the village beauty left his home to find work. However, he did not consider that with his skills and lack of documents, it wouldn't be easy to achieve his desires. He had to endure hunger and live on the streets for a long time until he was lucky enough to save a woman who later offered him a job. The young man never imagined he could earn money as a model. For him, it was an extremely easy way to make money. Therefore, he did not dare complain about the peculiarities of his work. On the contrary, it brought him happiness as he could gradually achieve his dream. Now the young man was posing for a photo shoot. In his female persona, he looked extremely cute, and because of this, he was popular with various brands. Even the manager, observing him at that moment, admitted that Dao Tian's enchanting smile could win over anyone. However, this charm only worked when the naive worker was in a female persona. In male clothing, he seemed awkward due to his overly small and delicate size. That is why Li Xiang decided to use the village beauty only as a cute and feminine model. Soon, in one of the capital's trading companies, an important meeting concerning a major financial project was taking place. Surprisingly, it was abruptly interrupted by a confident man. The CEO did not want to hear about it, as he immediately understood that this venture would bring no success to his business. He categorically stated this to all the employees present, and then quickly left. Zhou Chengyai was known to his subordinates as a stern, confident workaholic who had no extraneous emotions or interests in life. Now, having finished with the presentation of the poor project, he was heading to attend to other business matters. His personal assistant was very hungry and suggested the brunette have dinner before continuing to work for the company's success. The strict director did not even pay attention to his subordinate's request, as he was focused on business, even while on the move. Suddenly, Zhou Chengyi glanced out the window and noticed a large advertising banner. It intrigued him so much that he immediately ordered the car to stop. As soon as his assistant allowed the assertive brunette to exit, he approached the advertisement image closer. It depicted Dao Tian in a cute female persona. As Xiao Wu explained, the young man was considered a highly sought-after and popular model. Nevertheless, Zhou Chengyi was evidently interested in something else. With just one glance at the face of the cross-dressed young man, he fell in love for the first time in his life. The company director could not have imagined that such a cute model would suddenly captivate him. Sometime later, at the Yue Shui Entertainment Modeling Agency, many employees were overjoyed to receive good news about the latest advertisement released for a renowned brand. The manager assured them that thanks to the diligent work of the protagonist, the liquid soap he recently advertised had become extremely popular. Therefore, the woman promised to pay bonuses to all her subordinates, and the naive worker was especially pleased by this. Moreover, Li Xiang immediately paid the young man his bonus amount since he did not have a bank account and only accepted cash for his work. The village beauty was immensely happy, as every honestly earned cent brought him closer to his dream. Receiving the coveted envelope, Dao Tian hurriedly left the modeling agency, as his second job in the capital awaited him. On the way to his next place of employment, the protagonist reflected on how recklessly he had left his village for the big city, without documents, a formal job opportunity, or housing. Nevertheless, he was grateful to the manager for helping him overcome the myriad problems that arose in the capital. The woman not only got him a job as a model in her agency, but also helped him find other part-time jobs. Sometime later, the young man arrived at the construction site of a large shopping center. This was where his second job was located. Despite his cute appearance and delicate body proportions, the young man was very strong and could easily lift several heavy sacks of cement. Meanwhile, most office employees of a large trading company were astonished by their boss's generosity, as he had purchased an abundance of expensive liquid soap for the entire building, which was the most popular on the market. The CEO himself seemed truly obsessed with the advertisement for this product, because of the charming model who appeared in it. Now, on his way to work, the man wasn't engaged in particularly important projects. Instead, he was watching a live broadcast related to the famous brand. Surprisingly, the usually stern brunette became very flustered whenever he saw Dao Tian on his phone screen. Quite unexpectedly, through the broadcast and the dialogue among numerous fans, Zhou Chengyi learned that in a couple of hours, the branded store would be raffling off invitation tickets for a personal meeting with the young man. Once the man verified the information, he quickly checked the time. There was less than an hour left to obtain a ticket, so he needed to hurry. Therefore, the CEO ordered his subordinate to cancel all his plans for the evening and instead take him home as quickly as possible. Although the driver was surprised by such a request, he was obliged to comply. Unfortunately, this was not easy due to the heavy traffic on the capital's main roads in the evening. Xiao Wu had to inform his boss that they obviously wouldn't be able to reach the desired address at the appointed time because of this. This news did not please Zhou Chengyi at all, so he hastily exited the car. His strict behavior shocked his subordinate. Nevertheless, the brunette was unstoppable, so he rented a bicycle on the street and quickly rode home. It's a coveted invitation for a personal meeting with the protagonist was the most important thing for him. On his way to his apartment, Zhou Chengyi kept checking the fan chat, fearing he might miss the raffle moment. Arriving at the right place, he abandoned the bicycle and quickly ran inside, as there were only minutes left before the scheduled time. The strict man positioned himself in front of the computer with a minute to spare, ready to do everything possible to secure his ticket for a meeting with the model he had fallen in love with. Putting forth his utmost effort, the CEO of the successful trading company managed to submit the necessary application on the branded store's website in time, thus securing his ticket. Naturally, Zhou Chengyi was extremely happy with the opportunity he had received. Though he was an accomplished workaholic used to getting whatever he wanted, when it came to romantic feelings, this was a first for him. Sometime later, even after several hours had passed, the brunette's unfortunate subordinate was still stuck in traffic. He was very hungry and exhausted by the situation, although he wasn't angry at his boss for it. A few days later, at the designated shopping center, everyone was preparing for the presentation of the branded liquid soap as the model from the advertisement was set to appear. The CEO of a large trading company was one of the first fans to arrive at the event, being an extremely responsible and punctual person. Zhou Chengyi had meticulously prepared for this special day, dressing in his best suit and dismissing his assistant, promising to call a taxi for himself at the end of the evening. Xiao Wu, who drove the brunette to the venue, was surprised by his boss's organization, mistakenly thinking he had come to a business event. Before entering, the stern man pondered how the meeting with the charming model would go. He assumed that the event would be highly official and well organized. However, in reality, it was quite the opposite, as most of the attendees were not from high society. On the contrary, they were mostly teenagers, cosplayers, housewives with children, and generally quite an average crowd. Upon realizing this, the CEO became very upset. Not knowing how the event would unfold, he had overdressed and harbored false hopes. His bewilderment and anxiety were so strong that the brunette even considered leaving the shopping center before meeting the model. Nevertheless, when he tried to leave, he heard a very familiar voice. It was the charming representative of the branded liquid soap, who was actually a young man. As the event began and the crowd of fans gathered around the stage, Zhou Chengyi couldn't bring himself to leave. He understood perfectly that he might not get another chance to see his beloved. Moreover, seeing her from afar, the stern man realized he had to talk to her personally. The protagonist, meanwhile, was on stage and very nervous in front of the audience that had gathered solely for him. He was extremely uncomfortable, stuttering with every word. Despite this, the crowd was thrilled to see and hear him. Most even found the overly anxious young man's mannerisms endearing. Soon, when the introductory part was over, all the guests invited to the presentation were asked to line up, evidently for a more personal interaction with the model. The stern man was one of them. He obediently stood in line, unable to take his eyes off the village beauty, towards whom he felt romantic feelings. Gradually, the crowd moved along as each person received small gifts from the branded liquid soap company personally from the model, and also had the opportunity to take a photo with her and even chat for a couple of minutes. The protagonist's task at the event was to behave courteously and sweetly, regardless of which fans approached him. Of course, he had to continue promoting the product, and so he did. Surprisingly, he managed quite well despite the obvious nervousness he felt for the first time being in a female persona outdoors. Suddenly, one of the guests who seemed like aggressive and grabbed Dao Tian by the hands and began speaking to him inappropriately. The peculiar admirer looked slightly frightening and was overly passionate as he spoke about his excessive love for the model representing the brand. He then began demanding the naive worker's personal contacts, justifying his request by claiming he had bought over 100 bottles of the liquid soap and therefore deserved special privileges from the company. When the event manager hurriedly refused him, the unhinged fan became furious, starting to scream and protest aggressively. It was evident that he wasn't planning to give up his demands easily, insisting on receiving special opportunities for personal interaction with the model. Then, unexpectedly for everyone, Zhou Chengyi intervened. He provided proof that he had personally purchased over 10,000 bottles of soap, thus, by the fans' logic, had far more privileged rights at this meeting. Naturally, the CEO ordered him to leave the presentation immediately. This declaration by the stern man shocked everyone, including the protagonist and the event organizer who stood nearby. Nonetheless, Zhou Chengyi remained steadfast and confidently, yet firmly, reminded the crazed fan of the main rules of guest behavior at the product presentation. According to these rules, each visitor was allotted only 1 minute to see and talk with the model. The aggressive fan had already wasted most of his time and therefore had to leave. The brunette was very harsh, enunciating every word, as he absolutely detested the irrational behavior of the stranger. Surprisingly, the bizarre fan paid no heed to the information, instead calling it nonsense. Nevertheless, it did not change the situation, as it was indeed time for him to leave. Suddenly, it was revealed that the irrational fan had deliberately smeared the model's hands with his bodily fluid while shaking hands. This fact horrified everyone present at the presentation, as it was extremely repulsive. The stunned protagonist stood frozen in place, horrified by what had just happened. Only the crazed fan derived any pleasure from the incident, laughing at the young man's vivid reaction to his antics. The event organizer quickly called security to expel the dangerous visitor as soon as possible. But for some reason, they were slow to respond. While the staff member tried to morally support and calm the village beauty, who could barely contain his shock and anger, Zhou Chengyi decided to handle the scoundrel himself. Not wanting to waste time waiting for security, the brunette personally grabbed the crazed fan and began beating him right in front of the crowd. Most of the assembled were thrilled by the mysterious savior of the model, who so fervently defended justice and Dao Tian's honor. The stern man was exceedingly angry at the antagonist who dared to commit such a vile act against the person he loved. Therefore, the CEO of the large company continued to beat him until security finally arrived. Only then, and with obvious effort, did he manage to stop and hand over the offender. It turned out that the crowd of the protagonist's fans had recorded the entire incident on video. Only the young man himself and the branded liquid soap store employees were shocked by what had transpired. A moment later, Zhou Chengyi returned to the charming model to offer his handkerchief, attempting to help the young man rid himself of the disgusting mess. With this gesture, the brunette intrigued all the guests present, who now dubbed him a savior and a gentleman. Even the naive worker was emotionally moved by the stranger's care. Blushing deeply, he thanked the stern man. The company CEO then personally began wiping Dao Tian's hands with his handkerchief. At that moment, he noticed that the model had extremely delicate wrists, yet pronounced muscles. This unique feature of his beloved's body both surprised and delighted the brunette. It seemed he liked absolutely everything about him. In this intimate and highly embarrassing moment of contact between the two young men, the brunette behaved awkwardly and uneasily, while Zhou Chengyi realized he had a strong desire to continue touching the village beauty's body, and perhaps even go further. The manager, watching everything with obvious confusion, understood that the situation was becoming strange, so she hurried to interrupt the event for a short break. She explained her decision by stating that the model needed to wash his hands and calm down a bit. Fortunately, most fans were understanding. Leaving the stage with the man, the protagonist quickly headed to a more secluded place to rest. He was so nervous that he didn't even notice he was leading the brunette by the hand. Meanwhile, Lee Sung was already watching the news about the perverted attack during the presentation. Surprisingly, she was pleased even with such an unusual kind of popularity. Therefore, she called a close friend and asked him to help deal with the authorities who were alarmed by the incident. Shortly before the event, the protagonist diligently prepared, as it was his first time appearing before others in a carefully crafted cute female persona. Therefore, the agency staff not only helped him physically while getting ready, but also gave various verbal advice on how to interact with fans. One such piece of advice was the insistence on restraining his true emotions for the successful promotion of the advertised product. Even if a fan turned out to be unpleasant, he was to interact politely. After hearing about all the potential dangers that could arise during the event, the young man inquired about the possibility of defending himself and, if necessary, beating up any troublemakers. Of course, the boss forbade him from acting this way, arguing the necessity of maintaining the image corresponding to the product being sold. In other words, for the common good, the young man had to restrain himself. As Dao Tian had previously promised to behave correctly, he kept his word and maintained his cute persona until the end. Now, finding himself in the restroom, the young man washed his hands and openly expressed his outrage at the crazy fan who had done such a disgusting thing to him. Initially, the naive worker spoke very categorically and rudely, but later realized that his savior was nearby. This detail forced him to begin behaving more restrained again. Soon, the young man shared his true feelings with the brunette, but in a gentler and kinder manner. Immediately after, he sincerely thanked Zhou Chengyi for his help. This intimate conversation with the village beauty, along with his charming smile, made the company's CEO feel exceedingly happy. In that moment, the stern man realized that he could no longer suppress his romantic feelings and his desire to touch his beloved. Evidently for this reason, he moved very close and kissed him. Mentally, Zhou Chengyi acknowledged that he did not want to act so shockingly towards the barely acquainted model, but he felt powerless to stop. This sudden and frightening behavior from his savior greatly startled Dao Tian, as he never expected to be attacked twice in one event. Therefore, he began to resist and begged to be released. Nevertheless, the stern man seemed completely oblivious to the young man's pleas, as he was intoxicated by his own desire to kiss him again. Finally, the naive worker dared to push his savior away with a kick, despite having been previously forbidden by his boss to behave this way. Only by doing this did he manage to stop the brunette's actions, and the protagonist began yelling at him. Suddenly, at that moment, the stern man interrupted him with a declaration. He asked the charming model to be his partner, promising to do anything for him in return. Despite the highly advantageous offer, the young man was not inclined to believe what he heard. Instead, he stated that his savior was no better than the crazy fan who had attacked him earlier. He then expressed how unpleasant he found such behavior from the CEO of a large trading company. To conclude his categorical speech, the village beauty confessed that he was not actually a girl. To prove his point, he briefly removed his wig. Although this revelation shocked Zhou Chengyi, the young man seemed obviously indifferent. He merely scolded his savior for such an outburst and then walked away. Left alone in the restroom, the stern man suddenly realized the madness of his desires, which he had succumbed to moments ago. It seemed his own reckless behavior shocked him more than the truth about his beloved. Nevertheless, soon enough, Dao Tian had to resume his performance at the branded liquid soap presentation. He felt incredibly awkward, but the remaining fans appeared to be understanding and kind. In personal interactions with him, they tried to sympathize with and comfort the model. The kindness and responsiveness of others somewhat cheered the young man, forcing him to be less categorical toward his fans. Meanwhile, the shopping center security was having a stern talk with the crazy fan who had previously attacked the young man. They tried to reason with him using words, as it was not possible to arrest him for his actions. However, it was clear that the strange fan wasn't listening to them at all. Moreover, as soon as the instructive conversation ended and he was released, the antagonist unexpectedly met with Li Xiang, who was somehow familiar with him. Unexpectedly, from the conversation between the two young people, It was revealed that the woman had orchestrated the entire horrific incident. She had intentionally hired an actor to play the crazed fan. Unbeknownst to them, Zhou Chengyi was observing the conversation. Naturally, he heard everything and realized that the model had been put in danger as a publicity stunt to gain brand popularity. A short time later, while the hired actor was changing in the restroom, the CEO arrived to talk to him personally. From the start, the stern man decided to use physical force to learn more truthful details about the recent situation. Thanks to this, the so-called madman quickly confessed everything. As it turned out, he wasn't even a fan of the protagonist and was merely doing his job. This news horrified the brunette, but he had to let the antagonist go. Only now, having understood the situation, Zhou Chengyi realized that he had been the only madman during the presentation. Furthermore, looking in the mirror, the stern man finally acknowledged that he had genuine romantic feelings for the charming model, who was actually a young man. Soon after returning home, the CEO of the trading company felt deeply distressed and simultaneously enraged. Of course, this was due to the recent revelation about the beloved model he had discovered. Because of such shocking information, the stern man could not comprehend the entirety of the situation for a long time, and it was only when left alone that he realized how complex his life had become. Zhou Chengyi felt morally crushed because his first love for another person had suddenly turned into a problem for him. That's why, upon arriving home, he attempted to get rid of all the items associated with his romantic feelings, but as it turned out later, this was too difficult. After all, in nearly every room of the brunette's home, there were various fan items, from posters to figurines of the protagonist in different personas. It seemed that the CEO had been genuinely obsessed with his feelings for the charming model all this time. Now, looking at his entire collection of memorabilia, he felt horrible. In obvious despair, the stern man tried to force himself to give up his love for the naive worker, and consequently, to throw away all his belongings. However, he couldn't bring himself to do it, even recalling the real image of the young man and his frightened face at the moment of truth. Hugging one of the previously purchased plush toys resembling Dao Tian, the brunette tried to fully comprehend all his emotions. Suddenly, his body reacted, forcing him to relieve his tension in a physiological way. During this intimate process, Zhou Chengyi not only hugged the plush version of the young man, but also recalled their recent personal encounter. It was evident that he couldn't abandon his romantic feelings for the village beauty, even though he was of the same gender. However, he could only fully acknowledge this after experiencing pleasure. Naturally, this realization left him even more disheartened. The next day, the CEO of the large company received a visit from his childhood friend. His friend wanted to spend some quality time together, as the overly busy companion had completely forgotten about him. Nevertheless, no one answered the door, forcing the blonde to let himself in using a special code. Such inhospitable behavior from the brunette naturally surprised Wang Sheng unpleasantly, and he became seriously worried about his friend. Soon, the blonde entered Zhou Chengyi's bedroom, where the majority of the collectible items related to the charming model were located. Naturally, the friend was extremely shocked by what he saw in the room, as in all the years of their friendship, he had never noticed such obsessive desires in the brunette. Taking a closer look at all the toys and other accessories, Zhou Chengyi's best friend quickly found the one with which the CEO had performed overly explicit and strange actions. It was obvious because it looked excessively worn and was heavily soiled with the physiological fluids of the stern man experiencing his first love. Just one glance at the item horrified the blonde, as he immediately guessed what had transpired in that room with the toy. Soon after, when the brunette returned from the shower and found his friend near the ruined item, he felt so embarrassed that he didn't know how to start the conversation. Therefore, the CEO of the large trading company tried to avoid a personal discussion about what had happened. Of course, he failed, as the overly shocked Wang Sheng wanted to know the whole truth. Obviously, that's why he initiated the conversation himself, discussing what he had deduced in the short time he had been in his friend's bedroom. The blonde admitted he hadn't expected to uncover such secrets about his friend. Reflecting on this, the guest even mentioned Zhou Chengyi's deceased parents, specifically how they would be deeply saddened by their son's behavior. Soon enough, the brunette's best friend began talking about how the stern man had long needed to find a real partner rather than suffer in loneliness. Being a doctor, the visiting friend was deeply concerned about the mental and physical state of the homeowner. He insisted on the necessity of avoiding such extremes with inanimate objects and finally meeting a girl. Zhou Chengyi, however, did not want to listen to someone else's lectures on how he should live. Nor did he plan to disclose the whole truth about what had happened in his personal life. For this reason, the CEO tried to end the conversation with the blonde and drive him out of the house. Nevertheless, he didn't listen and instead suggested they spend time together at a bar. Wang Xing assured him that after some drinks together, the brunette would feel morally better and be able to relax. Though initially, the stern man didn't want to discuss his life with his friend, he thought that distracting himself from his problems at a bar might actually be a good idea. For this reason, soon enough, the two young men arrived at a bar owned by one of their acquaintances. To be more precise, the blonde was a close friend of the bar owner and intentionally brought Zhou Chengyi there to have some drinks. From their further conversation, it became clear that Wei had not yet opened the bar to the public, but he was always happy to pour drinks for close friends. It seemed the bar owner was delighted to see his friend, and he even promised to personally treat the two young men. The company's CEO decided to go wash his hands, thus leaving the two friends alone to talk about their own matters. Surprisingly, the bar owner noticed the overly sad state of the stern man and started a conversation about it. The blonde decided not to reveal all the details of the problem, but admitted that there was one in his friend's life. Suddenly, one of the employees entered the bar, carrying several crates of drinks. He was carrying so many bottles at once that he seemed extremely strong. A moment later, it became clear that this responsible worker was the protagonist. Apparently, this was one of his numerous side jobs outside the modeling business. As soon as Wang Sheng saw the young man, he was greatly surprised, as his face seemed extremely familiar. Moreover, he was astonished by the fact that such a short and cute guy was so strong. Soon enough, the two friends decided to get Zhou Chengyi drunk, as he was going through severe emotional turmoil. The brunette had never really drunk before and didn't like it, as his body reacted poorly to alcohol. Nevertheless, the blonde was convinced of the necessity to intoxicate his friend with a strong drink, since he refused to talk about what exactly had happened in his personal life. Though the bar owner didn't like the idea of getting a non-drinker drunk just to satisfy Wang Sheng's curiosity, he felt compelled to help him with it. Sometime later, Zhou Chengyi drank enough alcohol to tell his friends the whole truth about what had happened in his life. Moments after this, the stern man passed out from the excess of alcohol in his system, leaving the two young men alone to ponder what they had heard. Naturally, both of them were horrified by the truth, knowing the CEO's character and understanding that he was not the kind of person to kiss a model without permission. Nevertheless, they also suspected that the brunette had been in despair for a long time due to his romantic feelings, which he simply wasn't used to experiencing. Zhou Chengyi confessed that he had previously needed nothing, but upon falling in love for the first time, he realized that for happiness, he lacked the charming girl from the advertisement by his side. Now, he recalled with horror the protagonist's fearful, astonished face when he had lost control of his emotions and succumbed to the desire to kiss a near stranger. It was clear that what upset the brunette the most wasn't his behavior, but the truth he had discovered in that moment. Even his friends, who were drinking with him at that moment, struggled to comprehend the full complexity of the situation. Although the blonde had wanted to know everything earlier, he now obviously regretted it. Reflecting on the stern man's character, Wang Sheng remembered that he had been perfect for everyone and everything from a young age. However, his emotional state had been exceedingly poor, considering he was so good at learning and other skills. Zhou Chengyi didn't understand empathy and had no grasp of his feelings and desires. Only with age did he transform from the perfect student and son into the responsible and categorical workaholic, the head of a successful company. During this discussion, Wei admitted that he considered non-traditional orientations normal in any form, but he hadn't expected the brunette to turn out this way. Suddenly, the protagonist's close friend called the bar and asked to speak to him. She seemed very worried, as if something was seriously troubling her. The bar owner easily agreed to do this, and in the next moment, Dao Tian came out into the main hall to speak with her personally. At this moment, Zhou Chengyi turned his attention to him. Of course, even without the cute female persona, the man recognized the object of his affection. Thus, in the next moment, he jumped up and ran towards the young man. Grabbing the protagonist, the CEO of the large company pushed him onto the counter, evidently trying to kiss him again. Being excessively drunk at the moment, he couldn't control his desires at all. His friends were shocked by what was happening. Completely unexpectedly, Zhou Chengyi tightly embraced the young man, pressing him to his chest, and honestly declared that he wished to possess Dao Tian and was willing to do anything for it.